understand the importance of relationships within the organisation. Before we go to Sarah Hall on this, Michael, your quick thoughts, please.
I don't disagree with anything Bernard said. I think, people-based businesses are different and need a different leadership. The point I'd make, though, is that actually he was kind of damned if he did and he damned if he didn't. If he didn't make changes, people would have been sitting here saying, nothing's happened, it's just continued to slide, etc., etc. He made changes with, as he said, the full support of his board. And, of course, he's pilloried for that too. Not Hillary, pilloried. But I don't... I still think if you're not taking into account the fact that a media business is what Bernard described, that people collateral, there's all sorts of opportunity for it to come unstuck.
Sarah Hall was a political reporter and chief of staff for 3 News and was also on its 60 Minutes team, winning a national award as Best Current Affairs reporter. Sarah, hello.
Good afternoon.
Why do you think he had to go, Sarah? Because he had that full board support 2 days ago.
I think his job became absolutely untenable. I think with the resignation of Hilary Barry, that the other execs who were at MediaWorks became increasingly concerned about the damage to their brand. I mean, when you've got damage to your brand like that and what it's going to mean for your advertisers, he could no longer stay. Yeah,
Hilary Barry does seem to have brought this on. Former news boss Mark Jennings, whom you will know well, says he was never a cultural fit. But to take up Michael's point, I mean, did TV3 need warm and cosy? Didn't it need a shake-up?
It absolutely did, and I think that change had to happen. But when you are a leader of a company, you have to bring your staff with you and sell them your vision. And he simply failed to do that. Let's face it, Mark Weldon wasn't the first chief executive of that company who faced hard times. There were many other companies who did, chief executives who did. We went through bankruptcy, many, many times. But those chief executives managed to bring their staff along with them.
Was that possible? His vision considered what was needed for rebranding or resale or, reusing or whatever. Was it possible, do you think, Sarah, to have taken people with you on a dramatic mission like that?
Obviously, it was going to be incredibly difficult. There is no doubt about that. But I don't think the staff in there felt that they could question him. They felt that he had an open door policy. And that was the difference between him and other chief executives we'd had before.
He didn't do everything wrong by any means, did he? I mean, the youth audience for some shows is quite sizable. 2 of those shows are in the top 5, 25, 54 ratings out today. You would agree it wasn't viable for TV3 to stay as it was when he took over?
I absolutely agree with that. Changes had to be made. But again, it was the human cost. Yeah. You could have made changes, but you could have kept your staff on side and you could have kept your audience on side. He did things that the audience also lost faith in TV3.
So it was the way you did it?
Absolutely, it was the way he did it. He was not an easy chief executive to work with. I mean, all the executives there told me about that. One of them said to me, I said, can you outlive, Mark Weldon's reign? He said, I can't sleep straight in my bed at night. They were deeply unhappy with the direction he was taking the company in.
And now he's gone from it. Sarah, thank you very much for joining us with that analysis. Sarah Hall, formerly with TV3. Just time enough to tell you that Indiana wants me, in the words of the old song, but Ted Cruz not so much. So it's Donald Trump, gentlemen, all over bar the shouting. How do you feel about that Republican nominee?
Well, I think there's been an inevitability. I've started to get used to it. I'm not so worried about him as a Republican nominee. I'm just not sure what this is going to mean to the shape of the actual election campaign itself. I mean, it does depend on whether it's Bernie or Hillary, I guess.
Yeah. Bernard?
Probably President Hillary Clinton. That's what that means, I think.
Do you think that the electorate will turn against him?
Yeah, all the polls show his favourability ratings, not only amongst Republicans, but Democrats and Independents are woeful.
I just worry that something really mad could happen, like the stuff on her computer, for example.
Okay, yeah. We'll come back to those thoughts. Michael Moynihan, Bernard Hickey, thank you.
Kia Kia ora everyone, welcome to Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm John Campbell on behalf of the Checkpoint team. Thank you for joining us. Tonight, another Overseas Investment Office decision that suggests the character test may not be a terribly taxing one. John Key's personal lawyer and the blind trust he set up described by a High Court judge as a sham. Australia moves to combat profit shifting by multinational companies like Google and Apple. Pharmac says it will fund the cancer treatment Opdivo, one of the new immunotherapy drugs. The fire in Fort McMurray, it is huge, we're going there. Mark Weldon quits MediaWorks. Cruz quits the Republican race. And Mahi Drysdale doesn't even know what quitting is. All that and more in the next hour and a half. But first, here's Katrina Batten with RNZ News.
Kia ora, good evening. The Prime Minister says he has complete confidence in his personal lawyer despite revelations Ken Whitney was involved in setting up a sham trust for a bankrupt property developer. In 2014, the High Court found Mr Whitney helped to set up a blind trust, which the judge described as a sham to conceal the developer's identity and allow him to carry on his business. That same year, Mr Whitney wrote to the then Revenue Minister, Todd McClay, claiming John Key had advised him the government had no plans to change the foreign trust regime in New Zealand. Mr Key says he has complete faith in Ken Whitney.
Lawyers ultimately in their careers deal with lots of people and lots of clients, but in my dealings with him, he's been thoroughly ethical, known him for a long period of time. Sometimes lawyers do get criticised, but in this particular case I have complete confidence in him.
The Prime Minister, John Key. Ted Cruz has pulled out of the race to become the United States President, effectively ceding the Republican Party's nomination to the billionaire and reality TV star Donald Trump. The Texas senator made the announcement in Indianapolis after being thrashed by Mr Trump in the Indiana primary today. Mr Cruz says he gave his bid everything he had.
From the beginning, I've said that I would continue on as long as there was a viable path to victory. Tonight, I'm sorry to say, it appears that path has been foreclosed.
The Republican Ted Cruz. Bernie Sanders has won the Democratic primary in Indiana, denying Hillary Clinton another win. The Labour Party is accusing the Overseas Investment Office of again failing to do its job after it allowed a foreign company that was successfully sued for overcharging the United States government to buy land in Wellington. In 2014, the data management company Iron Mountain paid $44 million to settle the lawsuit filed by two whistleblowers. Labour's finance spokesperson Grant Robertson says the company is clearly of bad character and shouldn't be able to own what the OIO has described as sensitive land. However, the OIO has decided the company was of good character because Iron Mountain said it had made a voluntary self-disclosure to authorities and had cooperated with the inquiry. A group representing melanoma patients say they're emotional as the prospect of an effective funded treatment nears. Pharmac says it intends funding the immunotherapy drug Opdivo for those with advanced melanoma. It says this has been made possible by a $50 million funding boost, and it chose Opdivo rather than Keytruda on the back of stronger clinical data. The Melanoma New Zealand Chief Executive, Linda Flay, says patients are on tenterhooks waiting.
These are the same class of drugs with very similar efficacies, and we would be very happy with either of these drugs being funded, as would melanoma patients, I'm sure.
Lindsay Flay. Pharmac says it will consult before making a final decision, but the drug could be funded from July. The Criminal Bar Association says the manslaughter convictions in the Moko Rangi Tohiriri case should not be used to change the law. The Taupo boys' two carers had a murder charge downgraded to manslaughter, prompting calls for tougher rules on plea bargaining and an overhaul of the homicide laws. The Criminal Bar Association President Noel Sainsbury says the murder laws should not be changed based on one case.
When we try to overly tailor the law in response to a very specific situation or a specific case, you run into that old legal adage, hard cases make bad law.
Noel Sainsbury says he does not know enough about the case to comment on whether the manslaughter convictions were right. The Canadian province of Alberta is racing to evacuate an entire city, which is being threatened by a large wildfire. All 80,000 residents of Fort McMurray have been ordered out after a wind shift pushed the fire onto the city's southern outskirts. Local television says a trailer park has been destroyed, while pictures show traffic heading north on a highway to take shelter in oil sands camps. Alberta has appealed to the government for an airlift to rescue residents. The blaze has burned more than 2,500 hectares. In sport, Cedric Jackson and Ty Wesley won't be at the New Zealand Breakers for the upcoming Australian Basketball League season. Jackson, who's won 3 titles with the Breakers, has been the subject of multiple offers from other clubs, which the Breakers have said they can't match financially. And Wesley, who's been with the club for the past 2 seasons, is looking to move on. The new Kiwis captain, Jesse Bromwich, says he and his side are looking to keep building New Zealand Rugby League's international reputation when they play Australia on Friday night. The Kiwis have won their last 3 tests against the Kangaroos and sit at the top of the world rankings. But their task will be more difficult in Newcastle as several players are missing through suspension and injury, placing pressure on the new skipper.
It is tough to beat the Australians, but we don't think about that. For me, I'll be telling the boys to protect what the coach Stephen Kearney and the coaching staff and all the other players have built over the last 2 years.
Kiwi skipper Jesse Bromwich. Atletico Madrid are through to football's Champions League final for the second time in 3 seasons after beating Bayern Munich 2-1 this morning. And the Olympic flame has arrived in Brazil, where it will start a 90-day relay through 329 cities with 12,000 torchbearers that will end with the opening of the Olympics in Rio in August. That's the news.
This Saturday morning, 3 authors who have each written landmark autobiographical works. Jeanette Winterson, who's now revisited Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit after over 30 years. Maggie Nelson, whose book The Argonauts is both genre and gender bending. And Vivian Gornick, a self-described odd woman who found her voice in a book about a mother called Fierce Attachments. Join me, Kim Hill, Saturday morning from 8 on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through midnight tomorrow, Northland to Whanganui, including Bay of Plenty in the central high country. Fine and cloudy periods with the odd shower, especially tomorrow. Areas of morning fog south of Auckland. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, increasing high cloud. Scattered rain about Wairarapa and southern Hawke's Bay tomorrow. Manawatu to Wellington, rain developing tomorrow morning, possibly heavy for a time, then easing later. Nelson and Marlborough, rain developing this evening, some heavy falls overnight and tomorrow morning, then easing. Canterbury, Otago and Southland, rain developing this afternoon or evening, but only patchy falls in Canterbury, fine or becoming fine tomorrow. Buller, Westland and Fiordland, rain with some heavy falls, clearing in the south overnight, but a few showers remaining in Buller and northern Westland tomorrow. And for the Chatham Islands, occasional rain developing tomorrow. It's just gone 5:08.
Thank you very much, Katrina. Busy old day, lots on the programme tonight. We begin with the Overseas Investment Office, the security guard, if you like, standing between the outside world and sensitive New Zealand land. Yesterday, the Minister, Louise Upston, told Checkpoint she hopes the case of the Argentinian brothers with a Panamanian trust company and a fine for criminal pollution would be a solitary example of the OIO setting the character test bar too low. Tonight, Checkpoint looks at the foreign company allowed to buy sensitive land in Wellington in March, despite it having been successfully sued for overcharging the US government. Labor says the company is clearly not of good character and shouldn't have been allowed to buy the land. But the Land Information Minister, Louise Upston, says she's not second-guessing the OIO's decision. Our political reporter, Benedict Collins, has more.
In 2014, the data storage company Iron Mountain paid $44 million to settle a lawsuit after 2 whistleblowers sued it for overcharging the US government. In March, the OIO gave approval for Iron Mountain to buy the data management company Recall, which held 3.5 hectares of sensitive land in Wellington. It is deemed sensitive because the land is next to a reserve. The OIO told RNZ News it was aware of the legal action against Iron Mountain and that the company said it had made a voluntary disclosure of its pricing practices to authorities in the United States and then cooperated fully. The OIO was satisfied with the response and that the company is of good character. But Labor's finance spokesperson Grant Robertson says Iron Mountain shouldn't be able to buy sensitive land.
It's quite clear in this situation that Iron Mountain was brought to the attention of authorities by a whistleblower. It's quite clear that they were brought kicking and screaming to the table where they had to pay out $44.5 million US because of false billings to the government.
But the Land Information Minister, Louise Upston, says Iron Mountain has been upfront about the case.
They've provided the information as part of their application that's been considered by the Overseas Investment Office when they've made their decision.
I guess a lot of people out there would think, though, that a company that got sued for $44 million for overcharging the US government wouldn't be of good character, though, would they?
You know, I'm not going to second-guess the decision that's made by the Overseas Investment Office.
This afternoon, the Prime Minister John Campbell announced the Overseas Investment Office will be getting a staffing boost, so it is able to follow up undertakings made by investors when they buy property in New Zealand.
That'll allow us to do two things: for the Overseas Investment Office to process applications more quickly, but secondly for the Overseas Investment Office actually to be able to follow up on commitments and undertakings that are made by investors when they purchase property, for instance, in New Zealand.
The OIO is already in the spotlight for a botch-up over two Argentine brothers who were cleared to buy the Onetai station in Taranaki, despite a criminal conviction for a toxic chemical leak. The government yesterday ordered an investigation into how the office carried out its good character tests, and Land Information New Zealand's Chief Executive Peter Mercy apologised for failing to carry out a robust inquiry. From Parliament, for Checkpoint, Benedict Collins.
And we have more from our parliamentary team coming up, including John Key's personal lawyer and the blind trust described as a sham. We're also going to look at Pharmac's decision to fund one of those immunotherapy cancer treatment drugs. All of that before 5:30. But we're going to Canada now, where a huge wildfire, even by the standards of what we see in Australasia, has led to the emergency evacuation of the entire population of the city of Fort McMurray. 60,000 people have been forced from their homes. Very little warning, just the instruction to get out now. It's the largest fire in Alberta's history, and the situation is expected to worsen as winds increase over the next 24 hours. Teresa Wells has lived in Fort McMurray for the past 10 years. She was told to leave her home late this afternoon, New Zealand time.
Well, actually, I've left Fort McMurray now. I'm in a place called Wandering River, so I'm clear of the forest fire. But I certainly did see on my way out of the community, we have lost some significant infrastructure. We've certainly got some incredible fire action taking place. At one point, I had fire in the grass on both sides of the highway beside me. It's pretty remarkable.
It must be terrifying trying to get out in those circumstances, because what we know, particularly from Australian examples, is that when fire decides to move, it can move really fast.
Yeah, and that's absolutely the case. I think that's what we saw in Fort McMurray as well, is earlier today, this morning, things did not seem particularly dire, and then things changed very quickly early this afternoon. And they called evacuations in several individual neighborhoods until finally calling a mandatory citywide evacuation. I've lived in Fort McMurray for 15 years. I've lived in Northern Canada for 20 years. This is unprecedented in my experience.
Yeah, how did they get everyone out of town? A population of roughly 60,000 all hitting the road at the same time. What was the traffic like?
It was pretty brutal for the first little bit, I must say. Some of us headed north, some headed north, some headed south. I'm one of those who headed south, so we do have some of our community has gone to north of the community, so it was interesting.
And what's the fire like? Is it just huge, is it?
It's enormous, yeah. There aren't really words to describe it.
And what sort of forests is it burning through? Are these plantation forests, or is it out in the wild now?
This is natural boreal forest, but it has actually entered city limits. So we do have, we have infrastructure now that has burned. I passed a restaurant I used to go to that no longer exists. So we're going to see some significant damage in our community, and it's going to take a long time to sort of rebuild. But we're also a very resilient community, so if there's one thing left standing, I'll be heading home.
Oh. Who were you with? Who did you get out of town with?
My dog and my 3 cats.
Yeah, all in the car with you together.
I have the entire zoo with me. We are quite the little convoy going on here.
And are they behaving themselves?
They are. Nobody was particularly thrilled about this, but, we're all safe and we're sound, and that's really all that matters. And genuinely, I simply hope that nobody is hurt.
One final question. Are you insured? I mean, do you know what sort of situation your house is in? Do you know what you'll be going back to?
My last understanding from someone who drove by my home after I had left actually said that it was still intact. It was not in fire, and my neighborhood did not seem to be at immediate risk. That doesn't mean that, I have no idea what I'm going home to be honest. I have no idea if my workplace will exist. I have no idea if my home will exist. Those are all things to worry about another day.
Theresa Wells, one of 60,000 people basically just ordered to get out of Fort McMurray fast. Let's go south over the border where US Republican presidential candidate Ted Cruz has dropped out of his party's race for the White House after losing the Indiana primary to frontrunner Donald Trump. Cruz is an arch conservative, even by the standards of American conservatism, but he's considered less abrasive and less likely to go rogue than Donald Trump. Slick, packageable, in short, precisely the kind of candidate the anti-establishment Republican protest voter didn't want. But the Cruz camp believed that Trump would eventually implode, one outburst too many, one Mexican wall too high, and he campaigned as the safer, more credible alternative until today. So comprehensive was his defeat in Indiana, he saw the wall and it had writing on it for him.
From the beginning, I've said that I would continue on as long as there was a viable path to victory. Tonight, I'm sorry to say, it appears that path has been foreclosed. Together, we left it all on the field in Indiana. We gave it everything we've got. But the voters chose another path. And so, with a heavy heart, but with boundless optimism for the long-term future of our nation.
Ted Cruz, our US correspondent Nick Harper joins us now by Skype video. Nick, welcome to Checkpoint. Lovely to have you with us. Did Cruz have any choice at all? His number was up, was it?
Well, he always said, John, that he was going to fight right and through until the end. It was something of a shock, this announcement. I think as you heard there in that clip, he gave his concession speech, but all the people in the room weren't expecting that. There were groans. People were shouting out. It was not expected. It was something of a bombshell. But yes, in many ways, he lost, and he lost big in Indiana, having spent a lot of money, about $6 million, compared to Trump's $1 million. So he felt he had to fall on his sword.
This is an extraordinary story, isn't it? Because everyone keeps waiting for Trump to fall on something and simply not be able to get up. But he just goes on and on and on. Is the nomination his now?
Well, potentially, yes, John. I mean, he is in many ways the nominee in all but name. He does need a few more votes from the state votes, the primaries over the next month. But mathematically, even though he's not quite there, he will pick up those votes. And with Ted Cruz no longer in the running, it'll be much easier for him to pick up those votes. So yes, he's pretty much there, but quite extraordinary. He was, when he first announced his candidacy, something of a joke. We have to remember, he has never held elected office, and here we are in a position where he's about to be representing the Republican Party in November's general election. It's an extraordinary position for him and the party to be in.
Yeah, it is, and it's the Republican establishment, this very conservative, old-school GOP establishment. Are they choking on their bourbon?
Well, I think they probably are. I mean, they never really wanted Trump, the grandee in the party. There's been lots of noises about trying to dump Trump. There have been anti-Trump campaigns. They've got together a lot of money. They've put out attack ads against him. But now they're in a position where they kind of have to get behind this candidate, show a united front if they're going to have any chance of taking on the Democrats.
It really is an extraordinary story. Nick Harper live via Skype video from the US. Thanks, Nick. We appreciate your time, particularly so late. The time on Checkpoint is 5:19. Coming up, the Prime Minister forced to defend his personal lawyer, Ken Whitney, once again. An immunotherapy drug for advanced melanoma patients will be funded from July. We hear why and we get reaction. The Hutt Road cycleway upgrade causes a headache for the Wellington City Council. Mark Weldon announces his resignation from MediaWorks. And while we're on that subject, we'll speak to the morning after maids who promised to come to your house after a big night, clean up, make you breakfast and make you feel better about life. We'd love to hear from you in any way you choose. Text 2101 or email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. And don't forget, of course, our Twitter and Facebook pages. Thank you for being with us on Checkpoint. Pharmac has today announced it will be funding the immunotherapy drug Opdivo for 350 patients with advanced melanoma from July. The drug buying agency ruled out Keytruda in favour of Opdivo, which can also be used to treat lung cancer patients. It comes just 48 hours after Australia announced it would also subsidise Opdivo. That follows their earlier decision to fund that similar drug, Keytruda, both available on the public purse in Australia. In a moment, we'll hear from advanced melanoma patient Lisa Renwick, who led a petition to Parliament calling for the treatment of melanoma to be funded. It really is a last resort for a lot of these people. But first, this from our health correspondent, Karen Brown.
Patients with the deadly skin cancer melanoma have been demanding that Pharmac fund a new drug to boost their chances of survival. They've wanted Keytruda, also known as pembrolizumab, but at a media briefing today, the Pharmac chief executive, Stefan Krause, said it believes there is stronger clinical data for a rival drug, Opdivo.
We've taken the data package for Opdivo through our clinical experts, our cancer experts, and they have advised us that the clinical data is of good quality, well structured, and gives greater confidence that there is a survival gain for patients that receive it.
Pharmac has been given a $50 million boost to help pay for the expensive new immunotherapy drug and other new drugs. The chief executive of Melanoma New Zealand, Linda Flay, says many patients who've phoned her today have been emotional.
Sitting there waiting for this to happen, and then today when this was released, I mean, the emotional rush for them has been enormous, but they're all staying incredibly bold and brave and very positive that something is going to be announced that will show us that this is going to happen.
Ms Flay says patients who have been fighting for one of these drugs for 2 years are hugely hopeful now that it will happen soon.
They've reached a point now where they feel like it's in sight, and if the plug was pulled at this point, that would be absolutely devastating for them. So, yeah, I clearly just hope that doesn't happen.
The medical director of the Cancer Society, Chris Jackson, says today's announcement is a major step in the right direction.
We are now very close to having a effective melanoma therapy funded. It looks very likely that Pharmac will make these drugs available from the 1st of July. There are still some details to be sorted out clearly, and this is not final sign-off, but it's certainly a step in the right direction.
Dr Jackson, who's a cancer specialist, says doctors and patients don't mind whether the drug that is finally funded is Opdivo or Keytruda.
Oncologists think they're identical drugs, and we're happy just to have one almost at the stage where it's funded.
Pharmac is seeking feedback by May 25 on the plan to fund Opdivo, with final decisions being made by its board by July. And it says while 350 patients a year are expected to get the drug, in the first year alone that number could be as high as 700. For Checkpoint, Karen Brown.
Well, is Lisa Renwick one of them? We'll ask her. She was diagnosed with advanced melanoma on Mother's Day last year, given a very short time to live. She led the campaign to get an immunotherapy drug for advanced melanoma patients funded in New Zealand and took a petition to Parliament in February. You'll remember we covered that at the time. Until now, Lisa has funded her own Keytruda treatment at a cost of up to $11,000 per infusion every 3 weeks. Today was infusion day in Auckland, and she's in her car on her way home to Tauranga, and she joins us by phone now. Hi Lisa, welcome to the program. How are you feeling after this announcement?
Hey John, I'm pretty excited. It's good news. It's a good step forward.
You were on Checkpoint last night, devastated by the decision in Australia to fund Opdivo as well as Keytruda and the lack of any match in New Zealand. Do you feel like Pharmac has listened to not only the patients, but the increasing data around the efficacy of these immunotherapy drugs?
Yes, they have heard us. I mean, the data was already there, but I think they were moving at the pace of a snail. And I think what we've done, all of the melanoma patients who've stepped forward, and people like you too, John, who've sent the message for us, I think what we've done is given them a push.
Okay.
And they needed a push.
What happens now for those of you who are self-funding another drug? So you were funding Keytruda yourself. How is it working for you, by the way?
Well, I had the results of my last scan about 3 weeks ago, and I'm still in full remission. So it's working really well.
Can you contextualise that? What were you told after Mother's Day last year when you were first diagnosed with advanced melanoma?
They told me they were very sorry, but I only had a few weeks to live, and there was nothing they could do for me, and I needed to go home and settle my affairs.
And so you've paid for Keytruda yourself, right?
Well, the first drug I took was actually dabrafenib, which is one of the gene therapy drugs, and I needed that. If I'd gone on Keytruda then, it wouldn't have worked for me. I was too sick. I needed the bridge of the gene therapy drug first to get me well enough to move on to Keytruda, the immunotherapy drug.
Yeah, so what happens now for those people who've managed, and this is a really expensive drug, for those people like you who've managed to fund it themselves, do you transfer across to Opdivo? And people, if you're listening and you're wondering what's the difference, well, actually there's fundamentally not much. People often say it's like Pepsi and Coke, but will you transfer?
I'm hoping to. I'm hoping to move back into the public health system. I've still got a lot of unanswered questions as well, of course, as to how that can happen. But, I mean, 2 reasons. Obviously, the first one is I don't have unlimited funds, so it'll be good to be able to move back to the public system. But the second reason is I actually do believe in the public health system. I mean, my husband and I, we pay quite high taxes, and we don't just do that as a sort of insurance for ourselves. I believe in that everyone should be offered the same treatment within the public system. I don't believe that there should be different treatment offered to you if you can afford it. So it'd be great to step back into the public system.
There are people waiting for this drug. There are people who can't afford it for themselves. There are lots of people, for example, on Give a Little, desperately trying to raise money. Have you heard from people today, the kind of people that you've met during the course of your campaign?
Well, obviously today I've been up here in Auckland having treatment, so I've only talked to a few people briefly, but people do feel very happy. I mean, in some ways I'm trying really hard, and I think other people are too, not to count our chickens before they're hatched. I mean, the 1st of July is the day we'll know for sure, but I can't see Pharmac backing down now. I won't be completely confident, though, John, until that day.
Yeah. There's Renwick melanoma patient who has campaigned very hard, including taking that petition to Parliament for an immunotherapy drug to be funded. Pharmac announced today Opdivo, the other one really. Keytruda was the one everyone was talking about. The other drug will be funded from July. 27, coming up to 28 past checkpoint, 28 past 5 on checkpoint. The Prime Minister has been forced to defend his personal lawyer again after court documents reveal Ken Whitney was involved in a sham for a bankrupt property developer. In 2014, the High Court found Mr Whitney helped to set up a blind trust, which the judge described as a sham to conceal the developer's identity and allow him to carry on his business. It follows allegations that Ken Whitney was also involved in pressuring the government not to review the foreign trust regime in New Zealand. Our political reporter Demelza Leslie has been following this story as it's unfolded today and joins us from our gallery office. Welcome, Demelza. What involvement did Ken Whitney have in what the High Court judge described as a sham?
Well, Ken Whitney was instrumental in setting up this trust in 2009. He set up this trust 3 months after that property developer was declared bankrupt. It was a blind trust, which the High Court judge described as a sham, and he said that there was never any intention from the outset for it to be a valid trust. It was there to hide the activities of that property developer.
Okay, what has been the political reaction to this in Wellington today?
Well, the Prime Minister has been asked about this. He said that he has, complete faith in Mr Whitney. He said that obviously as a lawyer, Mr Whitney is dealing with a lot of people in a lot of different situations, and in all of his dealings with Ken Whitney, they've been thoroughly ethical. However, the Labour leader, Andrew Little, believes that Mr Whitney has some questions to answer, and he believes that, if this was a personal advisor of his, he'd be worried.
Okay. It's very difficult with a story like this, isn't it, to assess whether it is transcending the kind of circles that operate around the beehive. Are you getting a sense that this is going out into the population at large, that this is one of the stories that people give a damn about, or is this another one of the stories that people talk about endlessly in media and political circles that don't really affect the Prime Minister?
Look, this is a very big political issue, and it is something that is pretty big here in Parliament, and I'm not sure whether the general public will be all that concerned, because this story obviously is now getting several legs to it. It started off obviously with the foreign trusts and whether or not the Prime Minister influenced what the IRD did with regards to that, and obviously Mr Whitney's involvement in that. But Mr Whitney is someone that the Prime Minister calls his own personal lawyer, and Labour says that because of this the High Court case and obviously the foreign trusts issue, it really brings Mr Whitney's credibility into question, which also brings in the Prime Minister's credibility into question in terms of who he's trusting to do his dealings.
Demelza Leslie, live from our gallery office. Thanks so much, Demelza. We appreciate it. It's 5:30 on Coming up, this is a story we've looked at a lot on Checkpoint. It is profit shifting, the idea that you declare your profits in low tax territories and move your costs to high tax territories. Well, the Australians in their budget yesterday have moved against it. We go to Australia to discuss how they plan to do that. Mark Weldon packs his bags. Mahi Drysdale packs his bags too, but he's going to Rio. And could this be the next generation's answer to home ownership? Two Wellington friends cobble their funds to buy a house. We'll speak to them. Nona is sitting beside me with the business news du jour, but first here's Katrina Batten with the headlines.
The Prime Minister says he has complete confidence in his personal lawyer, despite revelations Ken Whitney was involved in setting up a sham trust for a bankrupt property developer. In 2014, the High Court found Mr Whitney helped to set up a blind trust, which the judge described as a sham to conceal the developer's identity. Mr Key says his dealings with Mr Whitney have been thoroughly ethical. The Labour Party is accusing the Overseas Investment Office of failing to do its job after it allowed a foreign company that was successfully sued for overcharging the United States government to buy land in Wellington. In 2014, the data management company Iron Mountain paid $44 million to settle the lawsuit filed by two whistleblowers. Labour's finance spokesperson Grant Robertson says the company shouldn't be able to own land here. The Cancer Society says something dramatic would have to happen to prevent Pharmac from funding the advanced melanoma drug Opdivo. It follows an announcement by the drug buying agency today that it will consult over its plans to fund Opdivo for about 350 patients with advanced melanoma. Pharmac says the drug could be funded from July. The Criminal Bar Association says the manslaughter convictions in the Mokorangi Tohereri case should not be used to change the law. The Taupo boys' two carers had a murder charge downgraded to manslaughter, prompting calls for an overhaul of the homicide laws. But the association's president, Noel Sainsbury, says the laws should not be changed based on one case. A council bungle means the country's largest concrete supplier has avoided paying a lease on its New Plymouth depot for 30 years. Firth Industries' lease on its council-owned site in Fitzroy expired in 1986 and has never been renewed, despite the Fletcher's subsidiary continuing to operate there. Those are the headlines. I'll have more news, sport and weather at 6.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina. Turning to business news now with Nona Peltier, and we have new jobless figures out today. I'm always confused by these because they seem to say two things simultaneously.
Well, actually, they say more than two things.
Right,
they say at least three, and of course, they're confusing. In fact, they confuse everyone.
Are they willfully confusing, Nona?
No, I think it's just because the way that the surveys are conducted, and we have three sets of numbers that come out on the same day. Effectively, you're not just thinking about one number, you're thinking about two other numbers.
My question was cynical and your reply was thoroughly decent.
That's right. Well, okay, so the number one, the figure that we often focus on is the unemployment rate.
Yep.
And it's moved up. Oh, you might think that's terrible. However, the market reaction was that the numbers are actually strong. Why did the unemployment rate increase? More people in the workforce. Yeah, that's why.
Okay, so is the market being perverse? I mean, this is the thing, isn't it? It's just so, whatever side you look at it from, it looks different from.
It depends, yeah. So if you're talking about participation, more people in the workforce, so therefore unemployment rises because there's more people looking for jobs, so there's more people, say, unemployed. They've arrived in the country. Lots of people have arrived in the country. They're looking for work. They're unemployed. Technically, they're in the workforce, but they're not employed. However, the economy is large enough that it's absorbing these people, so more people are employed. And because there's so many people looking for work, wage growth is subdued. So in other words...
Supply and demand, classic supply and demand.
So it's a combination of numbers that overall paints a picture of a strong economy, and that's how the market reacted to it.
Right, new figures on real estate, you have those too?
Well, those ones, again... We had 3 different sorts of numbers today. So, everybody got in the action today. We were completely bombarded with real estate numbers from the official numbers, which are the QV numbers. And that showed that the National House Index, so that's average residential property prices, rose 12% in the year.
Holy moly.
12%. And that's pretty much everywhere. Not everywhere exactly, but right across.
This is confusing for me because on the one hand the market is saying, boy, the economy is going off because, and that's why the people are looking for jobs and all this stuff is happening. On the other hand, the Reserve Bank is dropping interest rates to stimulate the economy. On the other hand, inflation is kind of nil to non-existent except for property inflation.
Hang on, who says the Reserve Bank is dropping interest rates?
Well, they have been, haven't they?
They have, but it remains to be seen whether they will continue to do so.
Right.
Because of all these indicators, and that's what they are. They're indicators. And what do they really reflect? Lots of people wanting to buy houses, lots of people looking for jobs, lots of people coming to New Zealand and wanting to start here.
Okay, so the property market is moving up 12% year on year.
That's right. And of course, Auckland prices, we had that earlier this week, as you might recall, our listeners might have heard this, that the Auckland prices are taking off again. So the Reserve Bank's measures to keep that under control have taken off. Well, Auckland prices have really hit quite high numbers. And again, supply is shrinking.
Yeah. Numbers. So, give us the numbers, Anna.
All right, the final numbers for the day. Our top 50 index fell about 0.25%, down 19 points to 6,824. And the New Zealand dollar, as we talked about yesterday with the Reserve Bank of Australia lowering interest rates, our dollar has lost a bit of ground against the US at 68.9 US cents and holding all right against the Australian at 91.8.
Nona Peltier, our Auckland-based business reporter. Thanks so much, Nona. Nice to have you in the studio, as always. MediaWorks employees past and present appear to be popping champagne corks this evening after Mark Weldon, MediaWorks' chief executive, announced his resignation. Mr. Weldon announced he was quitting this morning amid speculation of a staff revolt prompted by the shock resignation of popular newsreader Hilary Barry. His time at the helm was rife with controversy and saw some of the network's flagship programs, including Campbell Live and 3D, cut, as well as some of its big-name broadcasters. This report from Alex Ashton starts with former TV3 journalist Melanie Reid.
Working under Weldon was like watching a one-man demolition derby of news and current affairs. It's my view that he single-handedly, destroyed the place.
No surprise then that Melanie Reid is pleased to see Mark Weldon out of MediaWorks. She was a journalist for the current affairs program 3D, until it was axed under Mr. Weldon's instruction. And she's one of more than 100 news staff who've left or been kicked out during his 21-month reign.
While I think that there are champagne corks popping all over the country, people celebrating Weldon's resignation, it's incredibly sad because he has effectively destroyed an amazing news organisation.
Reports of MediaWorks staff threatening to resign en masse unless the former NZX boss left the organisation surfaced ahead of the company's board meeting on Monday. But after that meeting, Mr. Weldon gave no hints of an exit plan.
It was a good meeting today, actually.
And what was the outcome?
Look, I think the chairman might... it's up to him if he says something, but it was a good meeting, so...
Does he still have your job, Mr. Weldon?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
And indeed, he still had the backing of the board. It put out a statement straight afterwards saying Mr. Weldon had its full support. But then, last night, he quit. In a statement, he blamed the personal cost of the role and said MediaWorks is heading in the right direction and meeting its profit targets. But another long-term MediaWorks staffer, who most recently worked for 3D, Sarah Hall, says Mark Weldon leaves behind a workplace with deeply battered morale.
Make no mistake, Hilary Barry did not resign because of some sort of offer from Television New Zealand. Hilary Barry resigned because of what was going on in TV3 and seeing all of her beloved colleagues walk out the door.
And she says that dissatisfaction, not the so-called personal toll, led Mr Weldon out.
Mark Weldon resigned because the board put him under pressure to do it. You had many of the executives within that company threatening to walk if he didn't go, and I believe strongly that this is what tipped him over the edge.
MediaWorks board, led by former Sky City chair Rod McGeoch, put out a statement thanking Mr Weldon for his leadership and acknowledging his success driving change through the organisation. It also says the board will press on with the strategy initiated by Mr Weldon. The resignation leaves the question, who now fills the job? Another former employee, journalist Paula Penfold, says it'll be interesting to see.
That's a tricky job. That's a big turnaround that's needed at that company. This is a huge rescue mission that's required. I'm not sure who's out there in the marketplace at the moment who has the requisite skills to do that, because that really is a mammoth task.
Media commentator Gavin Ellis says whoever gets the job needs to focus on rebuilding staff morale, or the company risks losing its audience.
If they bring in an import who's committed fully to the board's strategy, then we may have a repeat performance of what we've had under Mark Weldon, because as I say, I think that he has worked assiduously to implement the strategies that have been put before him.
In the meantime, MediaWorks Chief Financial Officer David Chalmers will act as CEO. The board's already recruiting for Mr Weldon's replacement. For Checkpoint, Alex Ashton.
We're going to look now at the woes of another media organisation. Māori Television's chief executive faced rigorous questioning from a Māori Affairs Select Committee about its operations when asking for more funding. The committee questioned Paula Maxwell about the loss of high-profile staff, accusations of political interference and his own salary. Te Mano Kōrehi reporter Laura Bootham was there.
Fronting up with Paula Maxwell was Māori Television's chair Georgina Te Huhu. The committee was keen to know just what Mr Maxwell's role was when it came to political content at the station. When asked by Green MP Marama Davidson if he thought it was appropriate to interfere with political content in any programs, he said it only happened on very rare occasions.
I think your question is pointed and...
That's straight, yep.
Yeah, I think you should understand that my role as chief executive is also as editor-in-chief. I'm actually the boss of editorial at Māori Television. So I don't. It's not interference. It's me doing my job.
He was also challenged about the station's 2014 review and asked whether the restructure was to blame for staff losses.
A lot of publicity around those that had high profiles that left Māori Television, but we've had also a great influx of very high calibre staff. You know, I name Maramena Roderick as one of those people, a highly respected broadcaster who came in to lead our News and Current Affairs department.
Despite asking for more money, Paula Maxwell said Māori Television expected to break even this year and had $8 million in reserve. The chief executive was asked if Māori Television had enough money to operate. As Paula Maxwell began to answer the question, Georgina Te Huhu could be heard quietly saying, "You can never have enough." And the company's head of finance, Darren Beattie, agreed.
I'm going to pass that question to our head of finance.
Never have enough.
Yes.
You could do with more.
But Mr Maxwell rebuffed concerns about the Auditor-General's forecast of a deficit for the next couple of years.
The projected future deficits, 455k, 215, 216, 430k, 2016-17.
Yes.
So that's what we're going on.
Sure. And we've reforecast, and we're hopeful this year, we're confident this year that that deficit is mitigated.
When asked about whether his salary had jumped $80,000, Mr Maxwell replied that he was earning slightly less than the last chief executive. For Checkpoint, ko Laura Bootham tēnei.
Let's look at some sport now. The Olympic rower, Mahi Drysdale, says he's probably in the best shape he's been in leading into an Olympics, 3 months out from the Games in Rio. Drysdale has had to overcome sickness and injury in the lead up to the 2008 and 2012 Olympics. In Beijing, he won bronze despite suffering from a serious stomach bug. Remember, at the end of the race, he was just vomiting. And in London, he won gold despite a serious bike accident 6 weeks before the Games. Really damaged himself, still went on to win gold. As he approaches Rio. He's brutally fit and, touch wood, in rude good health. But so too is his rival, Andrei Synek, a Czech rower with 2 silvers from his previous Olympic appearances. This is one of the great individual rivalries in sport in the world at the moment. Since 2005, the Czech and the Kiwi have won the world champs between them. Only them. Battling for supremacy, sometimes with less than a second between them. It's a duel that is going to resume in Rio in August.
Yeah, it is. It's been a rivalry that I certainly relish. While it would be nice to go and win everything with no competition, I think it's more satisfying when you get one over someone that is certainly capable of beating you. And I know London was hugely satisfying, given the circumstances and knowing what a fight that was. And we basically rode each other to a stupor in the end. And if you watch that last sort of 250 metres, we're slowing down and the rest of the field are coming back because we'd probably both pushed ourselves beyond the limits, and that's absolutely fantastic. But when you lose a world championship title like last year by 0.3 of a second, while you certainly relish that environment, it also hurts a lot, to lose those tight ones. So hopefully in Rio we'll get back one over him again.
Mahi, can you take me back to the last 250 in London? How much is your body hurting? What's it telling you? What's going on?
Basically, your body's saying, look, it's you could just stop now. You're done. Just it's not the end of the world if you stop, and that's where your mind's just got to say, keep going. But I guess took a little bit of a calculated risk in London. With about 500 to go, I knew I wasn't clear enough. I knew that I just didn't want to give Andre at all a sniff, and so I just put everything into that sort of 500 to 250 to go. And by the time I got to 250, I knew I still had 30 strokes, but I didn't have the energy to sort of put those down. And for a little bit there was 8 strokes basically, where I thought he was coming back at me, and I knew I didn't have enough left to be able to withstand his challenge. So I just hung on, and then it was 8 strokes after the 250 boy. I saw him turn around, and his shoulders just slumped, and that was the moment that I knew that I was going to win if I could just hold it together. I had 20 strokes to the line, and I thought of 20 different ways I could have stuffed it up. So it wasn't probably the finest part of my rowing career, but certainly the result was exactly what I wanted.
Except in a way, I know what you mean technically and all of that stuff, but in a way you played your cards, you backed yourself at 500, and then you found these enormous reserves of strength and willpower. And that's what makes good athletes great, isn't it? That extra stuff.
Yeah, it is. That's part of rowing is you've got to sometimes just go beyond what you think you're capable of. And I guess with Dick Tonks as a coach, there's been plenty of moments in training where I've gone beyond what I thought was possible. But that's part of it is you've got to push yourself in those training sessions so that when you get to that moment, although London was tough, I'd been there before and I knew what it was like, and obviously I was able to hold on, and that's exactly what you're trying to do in that preparation.
Can we talk about Rio? You're 37. You look in magnificent nick, and I don't want to objectify you inappropriately on national radio, Mahi, but you're looking fantastic. Can you do it again? Can you defend your gold?
That's definitely the plan. I guess things are looking pretty positive in my training. I'm in good shape. But as we've spoken about, I've got a great rival in Andre Synek, and it's going to come down to who can put it together on the day. But I'm very confident in the experience. I know I've done it before. and I know how to do it. So, I'm very confident that I'll be in a great spot in Rio, and I guess in a lot of sense, there's going to be an enormous amount of pressure on Andre, and he hasn't done it before, and he hasn't experienced being an Olympic champion. He's twice a silver medalist, and that's really, I guess, my job. I've got to hand him the silver medal and hope that he's happy with that, so I can keep the gold.
What a contest that is. Mahi Drysdale off to Rio. It's been called the Google tax, which won't thrill Google. The Australian budget speech, the first delivered by new Treasurer Scott Morrison, contained the sentence, everyone has to pay their fair share of tax, especially large corporates and multinationals. And to encourage them to do this, Mr Morrison is doing exactly what the OECD is hoping governments will do, tackling profit shifting. What is that? Well, in short, multinationals like Google, Apple and Facebook are able to declare costs in high tax areas and move profits to low tax areas. Tax is still paid, but at the lowest rate that they can find. Not anymore if the Australian government has its way. To explain it, I spoke to ABC business reporter Michael Yanda on Skype video.
Basically, they're bringing in what in the UK is known as the Google tax, which the proper name is a diverted profits tax, and it's basically where largely tech companies, multinationals, shift a whole bunch of their profits overseas through licensing agreements, intellectual property licensing and things like that, where they pay big fees from, say, their Australian or New Zealand or UK subsidiaries to subsidiaries based in tax havens for intellectual property that apparently comes from those tax havens. But of course, it probably comes from San Francisco, but they don't really want to pay the tax there either. And this is intended to put a 40% tax on any profits shifted overseas like that. And given that the Australian corporate tax rate is currently 30% and slated to fall to 25% over the next decade, that's a fairly big disincentive for trying it on.
Yeah, it is. And on the face of it, it's persuasive. But how do you police it? And how do you know what is a legitimate cost? And how do you know when profits are simply cynically being shifted?
Well, on the policing front, the budget had a large measure to restore some of the funding that was pulled out of the Australian Taxation Office in the current government's first budget in 2014-15. So they cut about somewhere between 3,000 and 4,000 tax office staff. They're bringing back somewhere around 1,000 into this task force, which is going to focus on multinational tax avoidance. There's an extra 680 million Australian dollars for those extra staff. And basically, this new diverted profits tax puts the onus on the companies to disprove that they're shifting the money overseas for the purposes of minimising tax. So if they're shifting money from Australia to a country overseas where they're going to be paying less than 80% of the tax that they would have paid here, they have to show the tax office that they're doing that for a legitimate economic reason, such as the fact that the intellectual property really did come from workers in that country and it really does belong there. If they can't prove that, then it's up to them to take the tax office to court, otherwise they'll be paying the 40% tax.
Gosh, so this on the face of it seems like the kind of response that the OECD is so desperate for. How have Apple and Google and Facebook and the kind of multinationals that are doing this responded so far? Have they said anything?
We haven't had a huge response so far from those companies because along with this measure in the budget, there was also the announcement of a glide path down to the 25% corporate tax rate over the next decade. That's probably got more of the headlines here so far from the business groups, which of course they're pretty happy about, even though it is a long way off. And I guess that's also designed to make less incentive to go and pursue these arrangements. So it's a bit of a carrot and stick. We'll charge you less tax if you declare it here over the future, but if you keep shifting profits offshore, you're going to get whacked.
It's the ABC's Michael Yanda. Will New Zealand look at the same thing? Is there a budget announcement coming up? We asked New Zealand Revenue Minister Michael Woodhouse to appear on the program to discuss this. We've not yet heard back from his office. Cyclists, residents and local businesses in the capital say a proposed two-way cycle path on a busy road will be dangerous to both cyclists and pedestrians. As the Wellington City Council's hearing on its Hutt Road cycleway upgrade continues, councillors were told to rethink its proposal and to consider moving the cycleway altogether. It's the latest puncture, in the city's beleaguered cycleway program. Our local government reporter Michael Kropp was there.
The proposed cycleway will be on the pavement, sandwiched between pedestrians and parked cars, with only a painted line separating it from those walking along the Hutt Road. Decked out in shoes that clip onto pedals and with their pants tucked into their socks, some cyclists were keen to tell the council why this idea won't work. Kandala resident Jeff Owen says he'd rather bike on the road instead.
The proposals as they are, I believe, will put cyclists into conflict with pedestrians and into conflict with motorists. What they're doing is taking the existing situation, which is bad, and making it worse.
The Kandala residents group told the council to reject the proposal. Its convener, Christine McKenna, says it will make the road's traffic problems worse.
Safety on the cycleway will not increase by enough to make a difference. The so-called transport improvements are likely to cause an increased accident rate. This has the potential to cause at least as much public outcry as the Island Bay cycleway has.
The Island Bay cycleway has been controversial for the council, with many residents complaining it's unsafe and they weren't well consulted. Ms McKenna says any cycleway in the area needs to be easy to get to and safe all the way through to the centre of town. Businesses in the area are also unhappy with the proposals. Tim Kelly, a transport consultant hired by Carter's, a building supply company on the Hutt Road, says about 80 contractors visit the business between 7 and 9 o'clock each morning. He says that's at the same time as cyclist numbers peak.
We do feel that cycle safety and business convenience would be severely compromised by this proposal. And in my view, it's preferable to take a little longer to achieve an outcome which is both safe and not detrimental to commercial businesses. And to be honest, from being a cyclist myself, I'd actually think it'd be a more enjoyable experience for a cyclist if you're not having to look out at every single driveway and worrying whether somebody's going to come out and whether they've seen you or not.
Jo Glenn represents the Best Start Early Childcare Centre. She told councillors the new cycleway will make it difficult for parents dropping off the 100 or so children who attend each day, and it could affect the centre's bottom line.
We're very in favour of the cycleway running alongside the railway lines. It's not that we don't love cyclists. I too am a cyclist and a runner and a walker and a mother. But we just think that particularly alongside the childcare centres, this is a recipe for disaster.
Ms Glenn was one of the many keen to find an alternative route. One that's gaining favour around the council table and in the community is a dedicated path along the waterfront. But commuter cyclists such as Tracy Bergen-White say that may be great for tourists, but it's too out of the way. In her parting words to the council on cycleways throughout the city, cheers and good luck. For Checkpoint, Michael Kropp.
Nice, Michael. Talking of cheers, we're just going to change the subject entirely and relax after a fairly heavy first hour. The morning after the night before, dirty glasses everywhere, the house stinks, red wine, you know the scene. Two enterprising Aucklanders, Catherine Ashurst and Rebecca Foley, have set up a start-up company, Morning After Maids, to provide a solution for a fee. They'll come in, we'll tidy up the mess of the party. And if you're feeling really awful, they'll even cook you breakfast. I asked Catherine who they think their clientele might be.
I mean, it's going to start at teenagers. As soon as you can start drinking, anyone that has a party, whether it be a 21st or a 30th, a housewarming or a flat warming, anything like that is the people we're aiming at.
And so if I think about the worst possible scenario, there's going to be chunder, right?
Yes. Yep.
Have you had any of that?
No. Well, we've only just launched the business on Sunday.
Okay. So you haven't cleaned up anyone's vomit yet?
Not yet, but we have put in place an extra charge for vomit per area.
Per vom.
Yeah, per vom. I love it.
I mean, actually, we shouldn't laugh because, although I am, but actually we drink appallingly, don't we?
Yes,
I mean, this is a different conversation. I shouldn't be having it with you, but gosh, we drink badly. And I guess the point is that the morning after we've drunk abysmally, people don't want to clean up.
No, exactly. And it's also that they can't drink, we don't really want them driving anywhere while they're still hungover because most people get caught drink driving, the morning after. So we're there to then go out and go and get their food for them as well. Right.
So what in the circumstances where you just feel like death warmed up, what sort of food would you get them?
So we actually have created two menus. We turn up to the residents with our menus that we've got in hand, and whoever has slept over the night at the party has the option to order breakfast. So we've got a clean menu, which is a grande granola, and a toast and toppings, which is all organic and free-range eggs and things like that. And then we have the classic dirty, hangover, greasy breakfast, which you can choose 4 options, which is like bacon, eggs, mushrooms, hash browns, things like that. And then we take a drinks order, whether it be Powerade, V, chocolate milk, coffee, if they need some Panadol, anything like that. One of us will go to the supermarket, go and get everything while the other starts cleaning, and then we come back, clean, and then cook everyone breakfast.
Wow. And where did the idea for this come from? How old are you, Catherine? You don't have to answer that question.
I'm nearly 33. I'm 33 next month.
Okay, fine age. And so I suspect at some stage you would have dearly loved the service yourself, right?
Absolutely, yes. And I myself don't drink anymore, so I'm more than happy to cater to those that do. And I've been there and done that, and so I know how they feel. My business partner, Rebecca, she's a little younger than me. She's 25. And so she's got plenty of friends that still do this kind of thing. So we kind of just sat on her bed one morning because we live together. And it just sort of popped up in conversation, and then we had a laugh about it, and then we thought seriously, hey, there's actually like a need for this, and there's always going to be business in this area because no one likes to clean and no one likes being hungover.
Catherine Ashurst, it's 6 o'clock on Checkpoint. Kia ora everyone, you are with Checkpoint with John Campbell on RNZ National. Lovely to have your company. Thank you for being with us. Coming up in the next 30 minutes, we're going to return to this issue of the melanoma patients and Pharmac funding immunotherapy drug Opdivo, why manslaughter laws shouldn't be changed. The latest trend on the property ladder. It's been a busy old program tonight, more to come, but first here's the news with Katrina Batten.
Ngā mihi nui, good evening. A Canadian woman says she has no idea if her home will still be standing when she's allowed to return to her town that's been ravaged by a large wildfire. The entire population of the city of Fort McMurray, more than 60,000 people, has been evacuated from their homes. Teresa Wells told Checkpoint the fire has been incredible.
At one point I had fire in the grass on both sides of the highway beside me. It's pretty remarkable. I have no idea what I'm going home to be honest. I have no idea if my workplace will exist. I have no idea if my home will exist. Those are all things to worry about another day.
Teresa Wells. The fire is the largest in Alberta's history and the situation is expected to worsen as winds increase over the next 24 hours. The Prime Minister says he has complete confidence in his personal lawyer despite revelations Ken Whitney was involved in setting up a sham trust for a bankrupt property developer. In 2014, the High Court found Mr Whitney helped to set up a blind trust, which the judge described as a sham to conceal the developer's identity and allow him to carry on his business. That same year, Mr Whitney wrote to the then Revenue Minister, Todd McClay, claiming John Key had advised him the government had no plans to change the foreign trust regime in New Zealand. Mr Key says he has complete faith in Ken Whitney. He says lawyers in their careers work with lots of clients and his dealings with Mr Whitney have been thoroughly ethical. The Cancer Society says something dramatic would have to happen to prevent Pharmac from funding the advanced melanoma drug Opdivo. It follows an announcement by the drug buying agency today that it will consult over its plans to fund Opdivo for about 350 patients with advanced melanoma. Pharmac says if its board approves, the drug could be available from July. The Cancer Society's medical director, Chris Jackson, says it's a long-awaited step in the right direction.
This is a notification for consultation, which is the step prior to funding. So this is not a formal funding announcement, but it would be very, very unlikely that it did not proceed to full funding. Something quite dramatic would have to happen. So I think this is a clear signal from Pharmac that they are looking to fund this drug from July 1.
Dr. Chris Jackson of the Cancer Society. The Labour Party is accusing the Overseas Investment Office of again failing to do its job after it allowed a foreign company that was successfully sued for overcharging the United States government to buy land in Wellington. In 2014, the data management company Iron Mountain, paid $44 million to settle the lawsuit filed by two whistleblowers. Labour's finance spokesperson Grant Robertson says the company is clearly of bad character and shouldn't be able to own what the OIO has described as sensitive land.
It's quite clear in this situation that
Iron Mountain was brought to the attention of authorities by a whistleblower. It's quite clear that they were brought kicking and screaming to the table, where they had to pay out $44.5 million US because of false billings to the government.
However, the OIO says it's decided the company was of good character because Iron Mountain said it had made a voluntary self-disclosure to authorities and cooperated with the inquiry. Republican frontrunner Donald Trump has become the party's presumptive nominee after a commanding win in Indiana, and his top rival Ted Cruz bowed out of the race. The former reality TV star can now prepare for a match-up in the November 8 election, with Hillary Clinton expected to be his Democratic opponent. Mrs. Clinton's march to the Democratic nomination was slowed by rival Bernie Sanders' victory over her in Indiana. Mr. Trump's immediate challenge is to unite deep fissures within the Republican Party. A council bungle means the country's largest concrete supplier has avoided paying tens of thousands of dollars for the lease of its depot for the past 30 years. Firth Industries' lease on its council-owned site in Fitzroy expired in 1986 and has never been renewed despite the Fletcher's subsidiary continuing to operate there. Our Taranaki reporter Robin Martin has more.
Firth Industries is asking the New Plymouth Council for a long-term lease so it can develop the site. The council's property manager, Peter Hancock, says the bungle came about as a result of the local body amalgamations in 1989, and the expired lease only came to their attention last year. The council this week voted against offering Firth a new lease, but Mr Hancock hopes to have a new proposal ready by the end of the month. Firth has declined to comment. This is Robin Martin.
In sport, the New Zealand equestrian Andrew Nicholson believes he can still make the Rio Olympics despite the latest setback in his recovery from neck surgery after a serious riding accident 9 months ago. Nicholson has withdrawn from this week's badminton horse trials in England as he doesn't believe he's fit enough to be competitive. However, he says his performances so far should prove he's ready for Rio.
I'm better than some of your Olympic hopefuls. The horses are going well and I'm doing the job well. It's just I don't feel like I'm ready to be up to speed at the likes of badminton.
Andrew Nicholson. The Parramatta Eels Rugby League coach Brad Arthur says his players are still aiming for playoff spots in the competition top 8. The NRL has stripped the club of its 12 competition points and fined it $1 million following revelations of a salary cap rort. The Eels won 6 games in the opening 9 rounds of this year's competition, but won't earn any more points until they get under the salary cap.
We haven't given up hope. At the start of the year we wanted to be playing finals football and nothing's changed. We've got 15 games left. We need to win 12. We've won 68% of our games at the moment. We've got to win 80% of our games. It's tough, but we're prepared for the fight.
Eels coach Brad Arthur. There'll be MRI scans of bikes at the Olympics and the Tour de France for hidden motors to stop mechanical doping. Cycling's governing body, the UCI, says it's up to 12,000 bikes will be tested by a magnetic resonance scan, which will be able to detect motors, magnets and batteries. That's the news.
Frustration. They've been operating for a long time in glorified naivety, and anyone who steps in to try and stop them is attacked by the business community as being anti-investment. Outrage.
We've got to put our resources in stopping the intergenerational spiral into this insanity of way in which violence is perpetrated on our children and our women.
And desperate measures.
Having a look at the prices in Auckland, I can't afford to buy anything within the area that I'm looking for and to uproot 3 children.
A matter of perspective. Morning Report with Susie Ferguson and Guy and Espiner, weekdays from 6.
Then on 9 to noon, the South Auckland GP keeping babies safe from sudden unexpected death using a safe sleep calculator. And after 10, US photographer Jamie Stillings, who specialises in images of the intersections of nature and human activity, including massive renewable energy projects. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met Service weather to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Whanganui, including Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country. Fine and cloudy periods with the odd shower, especially tomorrow. Areas of morning fog south of Auckland. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, increasing high cloud, scattered rain about Wairarapa and southern Hawke's Bay tomorrow. Manawatu to Wellington, rain possibly developing tomorrow morning, possibly heavy for a time, then easing later. Nelson and Marlborough, rain developing this evening. Some heavy falls overnight and tomorrow morning, then easing. Canterbury, Otago and Southland, rain developing this afternoon or evening, but only patchy falls in Canterbury. Fine or becoming fine tomorrow. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, rain with some heavy falls clearing in the south overnight, but a few showers remaining in Bulla and northern Westland tomorrow, and the Chatham Islands, occasional rain developing tomorrow. It is almost 6:09.
Thank you very much, Katrina. Was that a Freudian slip, the Iron Maiden? Just your black T-shirt underneath there? Go to the concert the other night?
Absolutely not.
No, although I did see some men walking along in their black T-shirts after the concert the next morning looking as happy as it's possible to look. And that's what music's all about, isn't it? 6:09 on Checkpoint. Pharmac today announced it intends funding immunotherapy drug Opdivo for 350 patients with advanced melanoma from July. The drug buying agency ruled out Keytruda in favour of Opdivo, which can also be used to treat lung cancer patients. I think it's also been approved for that in Australia. It does come just 48 hours after Australia announced it would subsidise Opdivo as well as Keytruda, which is already subsidised and available to melanoma patients there. Now, earlier in Checkpoint tonight, we spoke with advanced melanoma patient Lisa Renwick, who led the petition to Parliament in March calling for an immunotherapy drug to be funded. Catherine Williams is another melanoma patient who helped with that petition. Catherine was diagnosed with advanced melanoma in 2007. But after her diagnosis, she was granted compassionate case access to a vaccine by the Malligan Institute. She's since been a patient advocate, and she joins me now from our Wellington studio. Catherine, it's lovely to have you with me. Can you see me, by the way? I can see you. Can you see me? No. There's a stupid cutout picture of me there, isn't there?
There is.
Okay,
but well, I'm fine.
Okay, well, it's lovely to have you with us. How are you feeling today?
Oh, John, it's been a big day, a huge day. This is the first response for melanoma cancer patients in my time of being diagnosed. So I was diagnosed in 2008. So this is the first time in 7 years that New Zealand government have responded, and the news was overwhelming today. Pretty emotional, pretty bittersweet for many families, many of our New Zealand families, but I think we need to be mindful that it's a great day. It's a great day for melanoma in New Zealand. Sorry, John.
No, I can understand this. And
sorry.
No, you've got nothing to apologise for. It's an entirely human response. And you're live on the radio talking about something which is literally life and death. And in your case, it's been life. And I think that everyone can understand why you might be feeling, pretty intensely about this. I think we need to contextualise. You were told you didn't have long to live. You were given compassionate access to a radical new form of immunotherapy, and you are still alive in defiance of all the odds. In the meantime, other people have not had access to immunotherapy drugs, and they have been dying. And that is the very real circumstance you find yourself in, isn't it?
Absolutely. Today was very surreal, hugely surreal for me, and I know for a handful of other patients who are still alive today. I was diagnosed 7 years ago, and you're right, John, I had access to immunotherapy, and I've always been an advocate for immunotherapy. It makes sense. It backs your immune system to do the job it was designed to do, and in this case, just to fend off the cancer. And I really hope through this campaign that it's raised awareness for New Zealanders, one, to understand that metastatic melanoma kills you, and up until today we had no effective response for it. And second of all, to understand that, for cancer patients to have had to become involved in this has been really taxing. And today I'd just like people to remember those that we weren't able to get to.
It's so big, isn't it? And also, people circle the wagons around Pharmac, and Pharmac's independence has to be protected. And Pharmac only works if it's able to do its job as dispassionately as humanly possible. But as country after country was funding immunotherapy, as Australia funded 2 immunotherapy drugs, Keytruda and Opdivo, and their rate of melanoma is now lower than ours, and as our sole form of treatment for metastasised melanoma was chemotherapy, which Pharmac itself admits is practically useless, it did become galling, didn't it, for people with metastasised melanoma to sort of wait and wait and wait.
Absolutely, John. And I'm astounded at how well our melanoma patients have behaved through this whole debacle, and it has been a debacle. I'm certainly not happy with what our patients were subjected to, and I'm pleased. But my personal campaign will finish on the 1st of July. I don't know, John. It's been a really, really tough time. I spoke to you on Friday, and it was really, really intense. Yeah. I think New Zealanders are to be commended. I think our media are to be commended for backing us, for listening to us. I think our communities are to be commended for taking what we were saying to be true and correct. I think sometimes people think, it surely can't be that bad. I'm sure the government would do something about it. The reality is our government didn't do something about it. They have stepped up today. I'm really pleased with that, and it's a good result.
Catherine Williams, who is a melanoma patient who kind of led the way with immunotherapy. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you for joining us this evening. Catherine has battled very hard for other people to have access to immunotherapy treatments that she has had, and by golly, it has made a material difference to her. Let's change the subject now to something that is very important and, intense. Lawyers say anger over the manslaughter convictions for the brutal killing of a young child shouldn't be used as reason to change manslaughter laws, to change murder laws. In other words, people are saying, hey, we've got to change the law as a result of this. The 2 carers of the 3-year-old had their murder charges downgraded to manslaughter on Monday. That has prompted calls for tougher rules on plea bargaining and an overhaul of the homicide laws. Sharon Brett-Kelly has been looking at this.
A law expert says the police should have pursued murder charges against Tania Shaler and David Hairewa. Instead, they pleaded guilty to manslaughter. Massey University's Deputy Pro-Vice-Chancellor Chris Gallivan says there were 2 reasons the police downgraded the charges. One was the certainty of a conviction. The second was the impact on the family of a drawn-out trial where the truth may never have come out.
Undoubtedly, there would have been some consideration of the interests of the victim's family, and to have that full confession with some light being shed upon what actually happened in the circumstances can help inexorably with the healing process.
But he says the police should have gone ahead with the murder trial.
I think that they had a very good chance of securing a conviction for murder, and I think in the context of the severity and the public concern that they ought not have agreed to a plea to manslaughter, and they should have gone for the murder charge.
Professor Gallivan says the Law Commission should consider different degrees of murder so the police can fit a more specific charge to the offence. The head of the Criminal Bar Association, Noel Sainsbury, backs a review of the murder laws, but he says the case of Moko Rangi Tohereri should not be used to change the law.
When we try to overly tailor the law in response to a very specific situation or a specific case, you run into that old legal adage, hard cases make bad law.
Noel Sainsbury says the Sensible Sentencing Trust's claims that plea bargains are done to save money in the justice system are outrageous and wrong. He says the United States has plea bargains, New Zealand has prosecution guidelines.
Prosecution guidelines allow for alternative charges to be laid and for there to be a discussion about whether those charges are appropriate. So in that colloquial sense, do you have those discussions? Of course you do. but it's constrained by the prosecution guidelines.
The Māori Party says children's lives should not be bargained over in court, and the outcome needs to be explained to the public. It says people feel the manslaughter convictions show the justice system does not care about children. Te Whānau or Waipareira Chief Executive John Tamahere says tougher laws wouldn't have saved Moko's life.
A blunt force instrument called a punitive retribution approach does make society feel that something has just been done, but it doesn't stop the next victims on the way.
Mr Tamahere says more resources need to go into earlier intervention and stopping Māori going to prison, but those programs will take years to put in place. The Law Commission did not comment on calls to look at different degrees of murder. For Checkpoint, Sharon Brett Kelly.
90 minutes past 6. A petition calling for the government to extend free checks for breast cancer to women over 70 has been presented at Parliament today. Free screening is currently available to women between the ages of 45 and 69, but the Breast Cancer Foundation says women over 70 have a higher risk than women in their 50s. Tiana Barnes reports.
10,000 people signed the petition. The Breast Cancer Foundation says extending screening to 74, as Australia has done, would mean 2 extra free mammograms for 80,000 women. One of its ambassadors, Lorraine Downs, says she was in disbelief when her mother was diagnosed 2 years ago.
My family, I'm from a family of 4 girls. We were absolutely shocked when we found out about Mum's diagnosis because we thought, oh, Mum's 76, she's great, there's no way that Mum could get breast cancer.
She says her mother could have had a better outcome if free breast screening was extended.
If she had found that lump earlier, she may not have had to have a double mastectomy and chemotherapy and radiation. So, we know that early prevention, early detection is the way, to have a good result.
The Breast Cancer Foundation says early detection is key and many women can't afford to pay about $150 for private screening in their older years. Its Chief Executive, Evangelia Henderson, says a lot of women over the age of 70 are diagnosed with breast cancer.
Out of the 3,000 women that will be diagnosed every year, about a quarter of them, so over 700 women, will be diagnosed over the age of 70. And that's really, when you think about 700 women, it's a lot of women.
A specialist radiologist, Dr. Madeline Wall, says the screening age needs to extend to match the average woman's life expectancy.
Now that life expectancy for women is so much higher than it was 20 years ago, it will be a very valuable thing to happen for women in that age group.
She says many women over 70 don't realise they are still at risk.
A lot of women don't realise that. They assume that because the breast screening program, as it is now, stops at age 69, that their risk stops as well, and that's definitely not the case.
The Health Minister, Jonathan Coleman, says the Ministry of Health reviews the screening programs and he expects the ministry to take the latest research into account on an ongoing basis. In Wellington, for Checkpoint, Tiana Barnes.
From health to whistleblowing, a new study indicates workplace whistleblowers in New Zealand need more protection. The authors of the Joint Trans-Tasman project say while their research is in its early stages, problems are apparent despite existing legislation designed to protect whistleblowers. Is it working? Eric Fritberg reports.
The project will survey thousands of public organisations and private sector companies to see how well they deal with employee-related wrongdoing. The New Zealand arm of the research is led by Michael Macaulay of Victoria University's Institute for Governance and Policy Studies. Associate Professor Macaulay says New Zealand already has legal protection for whistleblowers, but the law isn't completely effective.
The Protected Disclosures Act is relatively robust compared to a lot of jurisdictions. Some people have still identified some weaknesses around the definition of what serious wrongdoing might be, about the correct authority to which people are meant to do reporting, and even the protection of anonymity under certain circumstances.
The Protected Disclosures Act came into force in 2001 after a psychiatric nurse, Neil Pugmire, was controversially sacked for revealing that a dangerous criminal offender was being released into the community. Since that time, the Act has been reviewed and brought under the authority of the Ombudsman. Dr. Macaulay says the Act needs further work, but he says that's not all. Workplace culture, he says, needs to be made more sensitive to whistleblowing.
This kind of work, it's beyond legislation. It's about organisational behaviour, it's about management responses, it's about those kind of softer areas that make people feel safe and empowered and autonomous enough to be able to report things when they see it go wrong.
Both Michael Macaulay and his Australian colleague, Professor A.J. Brown, say while the research is in its early stages, they've already found a broad consensus that new laws and new standards are needed to support employees who report wrongdoing. Professor Brown of Griffith University in Queensland says further investigation is essential.
We know from a lot of research around the world that whistleblowing is vitally important to public integrity and to governance. What we don't know is how organisations can effectively maximise it and harness it internally and really take advantage of whistleblowing as a management tool and a corporate governance tool.
Professor Brown says whistleblowing is important because it can help fix an organisation itself, as well as providing an outlet for the individual to report wrongdoing. Both men presented their research at a lecture in Wellington today. Bill Rosenberg, who's policy director and economist at the Council of Trade Unions, was in the audience, and he shares their concerns about the Protected Disclosures Act.
We've had examples in the health and safety area where people have not been willing to speak up about safety in the workplace. We're seeing that in many places in the private sector, and in the public sector there are more and more pressures on public servants to do what their minister says rather than give frank and free advice.
The final shape of this research won't be known until 2018. Its initial findings that disclosure protection wasn't working as well as it could were put to the Minister of Justice, Amy Adams, but she hadn't responded by the time this program was being prepared. For Checkpoint, Eric Frickberg.
Just after 6:25, which means, well, watch is not very far away. Tonight it's Simon Dickinson and he has party time at Trump Tower. Yes, they'll be going off, and the cup of tea and a biscuit budget across the Tasman, according to the opposition. We spoke earlier about the attack on corporates who are profit shifting. Really interesting that. Will it be a precedent for New Zealand? But Simon is looking at the wider issues raised by the Australian budget. Right. This is a big story for many people, particularly younger people. If you're on your own, buying your first house can seem entirely out of reach. But what about teaming up with a mate? Navy colleagues Jess Shaw, who's 24, and Casey McMillan, who's 39, have pooled their resources to get onto the property ladder. Their home is a 515,000 four-bedroom house in Kelston, Lower Hutt, on a sizable 900 square metre section. Sounds like a farm by Auckland standards, far larger than either could afford alone. Jess and Casey are joining us on Skype video now. Welcome, you two. It's nice to have you on Checkpoint. Are you in your home?
Yes, we are.
well, the very flash lighting behind you.
Thank you.
Let's talk about this. Casey, you're 39. Did you think that you weren't going to get onto the property ladder?
Well, it was starting to look quite difficult, particularly because I spent the first 16 years of my career in Auckland, and trying to get on the property ladder up there by myself was becoming impossible. So when I moved to Wellington, Jess came down at about the same time. We had kind of the similar goals and a similar problem. We're both staying on base at the same time. So it really made a lot of sense for us to get together and buy a house together, and it's worked out really well. So,
Jess, can we talk about the economics of doing this? So, in terms of mortgage servicing, what difference is there between paying a mortgage and paying what you were previously paying on rent?
Well, we're quite lucky that we're living on barracks in Trentham Army Camp, so it's pretty cheap, I guess, in comparison to what you might pay if you're a renter. But from what I've heard from friends, if they're trying to rent in Wellington or even in Auckland, they'd be paying the same as what they're paying for a mortgage, so you may as well just buy a house.
Yeah, the issue is that the property market, the prices are so high that everyone's intimidated. And there is a notion now that there is an entire generation of people being left behind. Jess, you are young, you're 24. Did you feel like property wasn't for you? Did you feel excluded from it?
No way. In fact, when I've wanted to buy a house by the age of 21 since I can remember. My dad taught me about assets and liabilities. I think I was 7 years old, and he was talking about how assets put money in your pocket and liabilities take it out. So I was like, well, I'm going to buy a house by the time I'm 21. So I'm a little bit behind the times to get there by 24, but I would have got one on my own, but it made more sense to go with Casey and get a high quality property.
Yeah, and a hell of a lot of
I
land.
feel excluded.
900 square metres is a hell of a lot of land. Casey, can we talk about your peer group? So you will know lots of people who are roughly your age, right? So in their mid to late 30s. How are they going acquiring property?
Most of my friends are obviously Navy people these days. And I'm a little bit of an exception to the rule in that I haven't got married and had kids and settled down and all that stuff. I have spent a lot of time at sea in my naval career, and that's kind of made things difficult. So moving down here, as well as been an opportunity to have a bit of break from going to sea, has allowed me to commit to things that I hadn't been able to commit to before, such as buying a house, and we've got a couple of dogs as well, so that was pretty cool.
And so you go home to your own place. Jess, is that exciting?
Yeah. It's actually surreal to come home and know that I can do anything I want to the house and that's mine. Not that I draw on the walls or anything crazy like that.
Well, yeah, congratulations you two, Jess and Casey, who are 24 and 39, and they have teamed up to buy a house, $515,000 4-bedroom house in Kelston, Lower Hutt. I'm just giving them the thumbs up because they were with us on Skype. We'd love to hear from you if you are doing the same thing or if you've pulled up in any way to get into a property. Thank you for being with us on Checkpoint. It is our privilege to be with you. We will be back again tomorrow at 5.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. A huge wildfire is forcing more than 60,000 people to evacuate the Canadian city of Fort McMurray. The Prime Minister says he has complete confidence in his personal lawyer, despite revelations Ken Whitney was involved in setting up a sham trust. Melanoma patients have welcomed Pharmac's decision to go ahead with funding the immunotherapy drug Opdivo. And smoke-free campaigners say New Zealand should match Australia's latest tobacco tax rises. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Good evening and welcome to World Watch PM on RNZ National, International and online. I'm Simon Dickinson. Tonight